Welcome everybody, wherever you are in the world, and special greetings to every and all participants of the panel Anarchism and Language of the conference Imagination, Creation, Critique. In my talk, I present why Esperanto has been interesting, and indeed it is still interesting, for anarchists and what anarchists did and do with Esperanto. Let me start with a brief introduction to what Esperanto is. In a nutshell, Esperanto is a human language whose grammatical rules are more regular than the usual human languages we are used to dealing with, such as English, Italian, Dutch, Chinese, or Swahili. The title of the slide reads, Unu regulo por substantivoi kai adjectivoi. One rule only for nouns and adjectives. Basically, the ending for nouns is O, indicated in blue, while the ending for adjective is A, indicated in light blue. This means that the parser can spot parts of speech, such as nouns and adjectives, from the vowel by the end. It's a paradise of computational linguistics, as you can build up syntactic trees of a phrase very quickly, but there is more. In the picture, you see a big elephant with a small elephant. The concept of big and small are correlated as antonyms. One is the opposite and complementary of the other. Granda is obviously an adjective, as it ends with a, and it means big. But you can see that mal granda is related to that granda, and intuitively, you understand that mal is a prefix that indicates antonyms. Analogously, the endings I and oi, sounding like Greek, indicate the plural of adjectives and nouns, respectively. The table shows direct translations in Dutch and English. The application of mal is general, wherever it makes sense. Look at me now. Dextra, maldextra. Alta, mal alta. Antaua, mal antaua. Affixes, that is, prefixes and suffixes, are very powerful in Esperanto. They can generate a lot of derivative words just by analogy. Most importantly, this reduces the effort in learning the vocabulary, because in Esperanto you learn that main concepts such as elefanto, elephant, or cevalo, horse, and then you derive the rest. No exceptions compared with Dutch and English, which appear to be, at least in this domain, entirely irregular. Many second language learners feel frustrated in not achieving a decent proficiency in target language because of the amount of vocabulary and the irrationality of exceptions to the grammatical rules they apply by analogy, as children do, a phenomenon called over-regularization. This is one of the appeals of Esperanto, letting people without a particular talent for language learning or advanced education have a successful experience with Esperanto after failing with other languages. For instance, in the past, Esperanto was taught to illiterate workers in factories after migrating from different countries to the Netherlands. This, of course, also has a political significance of inclusion and empowerment of the working class. We should not be surprised that some anarchists may develop a political interest toward Esperanto. We'll make use of historical data, but here I aim to analyze the Esperanto language ideologies surrounding anarchism, not to give a comprehensive historical overview of the relation between Esperanto and anarchism. But there is another reason why Esperanto attracted people fond of internationalism since its launch. The grammar and the vocabulary of Esperanto mainly come from the three major language families of Europe: the Slavic and the Germanic, especially for the grammar, and the Romance, especially for the vocabulary. An iconic example is ter pomo. The structure is similar to the Dutch aardappel, literally earth apple, but the material is French from pomme de terre. Linguistically, Esperanto is a contact language. Politically, it is an international language. Esperanto is not the only international language constructed for political purposes. The science studying this particular kind of human languages is called interlinguistics. The great Danish linguist Otto Jespersen called this collection of languages auxiliary languages, as they should be a helpful tool, auxiliary, aside from national languages, without any aim to replace them. As a side note, this is a strong political statement that was put into question by anarchist Esperantists, as we will see in a few minutes. The point is that Esperanto was one among many, but eventually it stood out above the others, thanks to the partial adoption by left-wing movements, particularly the socialists, communists, and anarchists. What differs Esperanto and its rivals from human languages we are familiar with is their genesis. English, Italian, Dutch, Chinese, or Swahili are spoken before being written. Constructed languages are written down as projects by one person only. Then, after publication, the primitive contract development follows the same rules of the semiological life of the other languages, changing time with archaisms and neologisms and so on. Ferdinand de Saussure, the father of modern linguistics, already noticed this trait. Interlinguistics nowadays deals not only with international auxiliary languages, which means Esperanto and its rivals, but also languages constructed for artistic expression or other purposes, like the Elvish tongues by Tolkien or Klingon. They all have in common that they were constructed in writing with a purpose in mind. However, it is important to note that, unlike all other constructed languages, only Esperanto succeeded in reaching the definitive step of its development. The challenge of constructed languages is oracy, and Esperanto is the only full-fledged language coming from an initial project because of the size of its gatherings, the presence of multilingual Esperanto families, and the critical mass of speakers who use it in different domains, from science, astronomy, botany, etc., to hobbies, jazz, cat lovers, until ideological support, from Christian ecumenism to anarchism. It is important to underline that constructed languages in general and Esperanto in particular cannot have any success without a purpose. Human languages normally are transmitted across generations within the family, but constructed languages are not. Even Esperanto, which shows 5 generations of family speakers, is transmitted outside the family for 95% of its speakers. This means that the role of language ideologies is crucial. Why should I learn Esperanto? What does it bring to my life? If I am an adherent of a social movement such as anarchism, and I find that Esperanto may help me to achieve my goal, to transform society along the lines of my social movement, I may learn it as a useful tool to help me achieve my goal. This is the epistemological side of the language purpose. Esperanto gives me something that no other language in the world may give me, and therefore it is worth learning. The second side of the purpose is political. Learning a second language, any human language, changes the learner's worldview. For example, before moving to Amsterdam, my interest in Dutch culture and its relevance in the history of ideas in Europe and the US was almost absent, while now I recognize a lot of influence by the Dutch elite. In the case of Esperanto, its core values should align with mine, and then I may adopt Esperanto for my political posture, while, at the same time, I give something to Esperanto while I'm using it. This is why Esperanto is interesting, among others, for anarchists. In this talk, Esperanto is put under the magnifying glass to enhance the two aspects related to anarchism, the epistemological and the political ones. All translations into English you will see from now on are mine unless otherwise indicated. Are the core values of Esperanto compatible with anarchism? To answer this question, we have to go back to its origins, and in particular to the life and works of its inventor, Ludwig Leger-Zamenhof, who published the first booklet of Esperanto in the Jewish ghetto of Warsaw. It's not by chance that Charlie Chaplin, who, by the way, according to David Robinson, called himself an anarchist, in representing the Jewish ghetto of its fictional transposition of Warsaw, put Esperanto instead of Yiddish in some writings, as you may see in the second-hand clothing shop behind the protagonist, Vestagioi Malnovai. In the current slide, you see an extract from a graphic novel, Bon Venon, which is welcome, that I wrote for an Esperanto workshop in a Montessori middle school in Milan, Italy some years ago. It shows Zamenhof telling the story of the language in a nutshell. This is the standard storytelling of the genesis of Esperanto. Zamenhof explains that he was born in Białystok, a small town nowadays in Poland, close to the border with Belarus, in 1859, when that area was the pale of settlement inside Tsarist Russia. In his town, there were 4 groups divided by religion and language. See the balloon below. Polish, Russian, German, and Yiddish-speaking Jews, respectively, for the sake of languages and for the sake of religions, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, Protestantism, and Judaism. Thus, Zamenhof had two life projects in mind: to build a philosophical religion and a language acting as two bridges across the division of nations. His philosophical religious project was dropped, while the bridge language became Esperanto. Because of the empty space left by the dropping of his philosophical religion, it was possible for Esperantists to connect different language ideologies to the core of Esperanto's value, that is, brotherhood between nations and individuals on an equal footing. Why this empty space? For historical and political reasons. Historically, the first international gathering of Esperanto speakers, the Universala Congreso, or Esperanto Congress, was organized in Boulogne-sur-Mer, a small town on the French seaboard, in the summer of 1905. That was the moment when Esperanto became an awakened language, as oral communication started to become more important than communication in writing. The community of practice of Esperantists was formed, like chess players who play chess and talk about chess regardless of their passports. Esperantists speak Esperanto and reflect on Esperanto, building up a culture of their own. But the summer of 1905 is the moment of the Affaire Dreyfus, the J'accuse by Émile Zola, and anti-Semitism in France. Zamenhof agreed not to say to the general public that he was a Jew. That's why we often read Polish occultists about him. Moreover, the cultural frame of the French pioneers of the Esperanto movement, among whom many were also Catholic, was nationalism. So, the French introduced the Esperanto flag and the pseudo-national anthem, putting Zamenhof's poem La Espero into music resembling a Marseillaise. Zamenhof's position on national identities was, if not ambiguous, at least unclear for a long time. In his solemn opening speech in Boulogne, he framed Esperantists as one nation, but then, echoing Terence's motto Homo sum, I am a human being, which is the foundation of humanism, he said that he belonged to neither a nation nor a partisan religion, before reciting the Pregio, his prayer under the Esperanto flag. The Congress organizers asked him not to recite the last stanza, which pledges interreligious peace among Jews, Christians, and Muslims, being the sons of the same God. Zamenhof believed that Nazia patriotismo, national patriotism, is acceptable as a natural affection to one's land traditions, while the dark side of the moon, Genta chauvinism, ethnic chauvinism, is harmful and should be abandoned in favor of a neutral stance in adopting Esperanto for international relations. Zamenhof's position against nationalism as the dark side of the moon on national identities became clear only in 1914, when he refused to be the honorary member of the newborn Jewish Esperanto League. If the nationalism of the strong is ignoble, the nationalism of the weak is unreasonable, and one nurtures the other in a vicious circle, he argues. Only neutral ground can bring to absolute interhuman justice. It is worth noting that Zamenhof considered workers as natural adopters of Esperanto, being naturally an international community of practice, as this quotation, often referred to by the anarchist Esperantists, attests. Workers quickly adopted Esperanto for their political struggle. In the Netherlands, for example, the Federation of Workers Esperantists was founded in 1911, as reported by Mark van Oostendorp. Moreover, one of the most important historians of the workers' Esperanto movement was a Dutchman, Gerrit Paulus de Bruin. We can say that politically, the anarchist and left-wing sides of the Esperanto movement came out almost at the same time, in the early years of Esperanto. In the Belle Époque, the messianic figure of Zamenhof and the deification of hope, representing Esperanto, made the collaboration between the two sides of the Esperanto movements very difficult or impossible, except for pure linguistic matters, which will not be considered in this talk. At the extreme, we must briefly mention the strange case of Mauresnais, an Anabaptist land peace with the Vier-Landen-Punt, a point where 4 countries touched, which in 1908 became an ephemeral Esperanto state. Its name was Amicaio, Friend's Place, with an anthem of its own. During the Belle Époque, the main language ideology of anarchists was multilingualism. As Lucia Campanella shows, many anarchists were polyglots, and thanks to that, they could form an international network of supporters of the international anarchist cause. The overlap with the Esperanto movement never achieved a critical mass, so to make the whole network of anarchists adopt Esperanto massively. In his small book devoted to Esperanto and Anarchism, Xavi Alcalde presents the first adoptions of Esperanto by anarchists since its publication in 1887. Also, he puts the quest for a world language in the context of the reflections by libertarians, anarchists, and also by utopian socialists, and even one of the two founders of communism, Friedrich Engels. From an epistemological point of view, in general, adopting a world language was epistemologically and politically naive at first. More or less, it was expressed in these terms. As the world is nowadays connected by railways and airplanes, they argued, the world needs a world language to go beyond the language barriers. An exception was Tolstoy, defined by Alcalde as Christian, anarchist, and pacifist, who learned Esperanto in the first years. He sent a letter arguing that Esperanto is too European to be a truly world language. Nonetheless, for the Christian part of the world in Europe and the Americas, it fits the needs of reciprocal understanding, and therefore it is a Christian cause. This is one of the few cases of the Esperanto reflection where religiosity and anarchism are put together. The naivety of anarchists ended in 1907. Already in 1904, Émile Chapelier felt that the libertarian and anarchist Esperantists should organize themselves as the Catholic Esperantists were already doing so, as reported by Xavi Alcalde. But it was the Amsterdam Congress in 1907, which marked the turning point, as point 10 in the agenda was devoted to the issue of overcoming language barriers. The pamphlet, quickly published in French and English, but interestingly enough not in Esperanto, argued against the multilingual stance by the majority of anarchists as translations cause a loss of time, a political damage, and a loss of knowledge, an epistemological flaw. However, no decision was taken to adopt Esperanto, as the Congress declared itself incompetent, and further studies of the problem were wished for. Chapelier did not stop. He wanted to show the utility of Esperanto for the cause, offering a non-nationalist, anti-capitalist point of view to inform libertarians, anarchists, and not only, through a brand new publication, the Internazia Socia Revue, International Social Review. The cover illustrates the concept well. The main point by Chapelier will become a leitmotif for anarchist Esperantists. Any national language is inherently chauvinist, because it is the linguistic foundation of the power of the bourgeoisie that holds the power through capitalism. Esperanto, having only 16 rules and being logical, argues Chapelier and all Esperanto pioneers, is the only international auxiliary language fit for fulfilling the purpose. Unfortunately, a major event changed the whole picture and required a profound reframing of the issue of the world language for anarchists, the Great War. The neutralist Esperantists, already vaguely pacifists in the Belle Époque, became strongly anti-militarists. At the same time, the anarchists saw that Esperanto was taken into consideration as a linguistic tool for the world revolution by communists. A proletarian version was envisaged as the common language for all Soviets. After the October Revolution in Russia, the Third International, itself multilingual, proposed to develop a proletarian version of Esperanto. That never happened. In 1921, the Universala Congresso, the annual ritual confirming the foundation of the community of practice in Boulogne-sur-Mer in 1905, was held in Prague. While many communist parties were founded around the world, 79 Esperanto workers who were participating in Prague founded SAT, Sjednacica Asocio Tutmonda, World and Nationalists Association. In the group photo, the founders. In the first line, you see a gentleman with a long beard. Immediately on the right of a gentlewoman holding the Esperanto star. That man is Eugenio Lanti. More details on him in a minute. Since its foundation, SAT is the point of reference of Esperantist workers, and still nowadays it is the most relevant in the world for all left-wing Esperantists in general. Its acme numbers was in 1929, the only moment in history when workers were on the same page as Esperanto neutralists. The general idea of SAT is that Esperanto is the workers' Latin. My brother is not my compatriot who is bourgeois. but a fellow worker of the other nations with whom I communicate in Esperanto. The internal division of leftist Esperantism between supporters of the Soviet Union and opponents, Lanti fiercely being one of them, did not help this general idea. In his History of Esperanto, Korzenkov, 2005, informs that in May 1935, SAT had only 1,244 members, of whom 310 were from the Netherlands. The more totalitarianism was on the rise, the more difficulties for SAT. The main language ideology of SAT is Sen-Nazismo, the A-nationalism by Eugenio Lanti, the one against, whose original French name was Eugène Adam. Born as a Frenchman to a Catholic family in the countryside, Eugène Adam encounters anarchism in Paris by the end of the 19th century. During his service in the Great War, he became an Esperantist, thanks to the Catholic priest, Lecomte, with whom he took care of German soldiers too. Karl Lander offers an excellent synthesis of Lanti's philosophy, but fails to put it in contrast with Zamenhof's, even though Lanti proclaimed himself to be his true heir. While the founder of Esperanto framed Esperanto as an antidote to the excessive power of the nation, and so of the state, avoiding the supremacy of some national languages over others, with a special regard to the anti-colonial uprisings in Oriental Asia, Eugenio Lanti, for la neutralismon, away with naturalism, wants to unify humanity around the planetary patriotism of the global working class, who will speak only Esperanto, having destroyed the nation-state. In his post-capitalist techno-utopia, Karl Lander's wording, the future Esperanto world will be monolingual. This is a direct attack on the multilingual stance of the anarchists. Formulating a philosophy in Esperanto opens its author to a paradox. No matter the openness of the content, the philosophy is bound to a language which is, admittedly, a lesser used language. This is true both for Zamenhof and Lanti. In particular, Lanti's anarchism has virtually no echo outside the Esperanto world. This matter of fact becomes clear from an interview with Enrico Malatesta, a major figure in anarchism since the First International in 1871, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. Malatesta learned to read Esperanto, but the presence of a rival at the time, Ido, made him lose interest in the role of Esperanto for anarchism. Also, the rise of fascism in Italy and elsewhere became a most urgent matter for him. On the other hand, SAT quickly became the ideological house of all Esperanto leftists, no matter if they adhere to Lanti's peculiar nationalism. The example of Neselberg's illustrates how the rise of fascism across Europe brought some leftists to find shelter in Esperanto. In my participants' observation of the Esperanto phenomenon since 1996, I've never met any Esperanto speaker truly accepting Lanti's philosophy off the shelf. While the connection between capitalism and the nation-state was clear in Lanti's lifetime, nowadays capitalism is in the hands of multinational corporations, and even some argue that the state is a force counterbalancing corporations. To summarize, Lanti's claim that the nation-state and the class ruling it, the bourgeoisie, are responsible for capitalism and therefore an Esperanto-speaking working class will destroy nation-states and establish a world revolution bringing peace is hardly acceptable as it is. However, Lanti's ideas are a constant source of reflection in discourse around the political value of Esperanto. World War II is a great divide also in the context of Esperanto. In the slide, an excerpt from the graphic novel Esperantist by Dan Mazo, which offers a synthesis of Hitler's and Stalin's persecutions of Esperanto speakers because the language was considered dangerous. Of course, members of SAT were targeted with scientific precision, and so the Esperanto anarchist movement was decimated. The figure of Lanti had not been leading SAT since 1937, and he would die soon after World War II. No other charismatic leader emerged. Paris still ruled the anarchic Esperantists, and still does nowadays. Initially, there were Spanish exiles who had reconstructed SAT in the aftermath of World War II. Alcalde informs us that the presence of anarchic Esperantists from Oriental Asia has become much more important since the reconstruction. Interestingly, SAT formed factions along ideological lines, and anarchism was one of them, under the name Liberezzana Frakcio, the faction of libertarians. Its bulletin came out until 2004, and its web page was active until 2020. Jacques Schramm, chairman of the executive committee, informed that SAT members were 881 in 2003, and then it went down. 724 members in 2006, and after 10 years, in 2016, just 525. In 2009, the International Congress of SAT number 82 was held in Milan under the umbrella of Arci Esperanto, a branch of the most important social promotion non-profit organization in Italy. And Jacques Schramm had a conversation on the political relevance of Esperanto with the president of UEA, the Universal Esperanto Association, Robert Dasgupta at the time. I was there, and I felt I was living a historical moment, as it had never happened before that the two de facto leaders of the leftist and neutralist Esperanto movements talked to each other in the whole history of Esperanto. However, perhaps I was the only one, as no substantial echo outside the local bulletin of the Milanese Esperanto Club would be heard. Actually, the proposals for collaboration remained on paper. In an interview by Libera Folio, an independent Esperanto web magazine, with the president of SAT, Vinko Markovo, on the occasion of the Jubilee year 2021, we learned that SAT members are only 450, and that SAT is the ideal forum for Esperanto speakers interested in talking about politics without taboos. It is clear to me that nowadays anarchism, so important in the early years of the association, is just one leftist ideology among many. It's time to go to the final remarks. The relationship between Esperanto and anarchism is twofold. On the one hand, anarchic Esperantists are Esperantists, so they are open to dialogue with non-anarchic Esperantists. Unlike the others, the political stance related to nationality and especially nationalism is sharply against the latter, without hesitation. In this context, anarchism is a force clarifying the Esperanto language ideology. On the other hand, anarchists joining Esperanto substantially failed to overcome the mainstream anarchist language ideology supporting multilingualism. The radicalism by Lanti had a strong appeal in the interwar period, but after World War II, it started to remain the foundational ideology of SAT without playing an active role in its concrete action. This is the paradox of expressing a language ideology to Esperanto. Esperanto is the vehicle that makes that ideology possible, but its limited spread hinders that ideology from being widely accepted beyond the limitations of Esperanto activism. Thank you for your kind attention.